We all go through this. Musical inspiration comes and goes in waves, as you know. You might have a week where every day you write a full song, and then you might have a month where every day you walk by your studio full of guilt as you go to boot up Elden Ring and have a good cry. I don't think it's necessarily helpful to try to force creativity during a dry spell, but I do have some tips and methods that could help get you back on track when you're feeling out of whack. I got your back. At least, these are some of the things that have worked really great for me in the past. Sorry about that rhyme, by the way. So let's get into it. Again, these are just some ideas to try to break you out of a rut if you're frustrated with not being able to be as productive as you hoped. Don't be afraid to work on something that you don't necessarily like. You know those projects that you were really excited about at first and then kind of just fell flat? I have quite a few of these projects myself, just kind of sitting there, taking up precious storage space on your devices and memory cards. But for some reason, you can't quite bring yourself to delete the project. That must mean something, right? Of course. These projects started from somewhere. You started them because you were excited about them in the first place. Maybe it was a melody or a drum groove or a cool loop you found that you got really excited about and wanted to turn into something. But perhaps it didn't work out for some reason. Maybe you got bored or distracted or just it turned into something you kind of hated. Not what you were expecting. So this method is to just go back to one of those projects and try to identify that little piece, that gem that you really liked in the first place that got you interested in the project, and get rid of everything else. Pare it down to that element. You're basically giving yourself a fresh slate that is just comprised of the good idea that you had in the first place. The hard part about this is potentially continuing to identify a particular element you added that you didn't like with the base of that project. I've heard the haunting whisper of melodies I've since long deleted from projects that they kind of ruined, but I went back using this kind of mindset, deleted the melody, and just came up with something new. It's almost always worth it to dig up that gem of inspiration that got you excited about the project in the first place and kind of give that a second go. Give it a retry, a redo, and make something worthwhile. On the contrary, another creative exercise is to go back to a project that perhaps you did really like, but maybe you hit a creative wall with, or the timing didn't work out and your flow got interrupted. Go back to this track, to this work in progress, and approach it not only with new intent, but also with new instruments, or samples, or a new synth patch. I made one of my favorite songs I've made in a really long time last week, and it came from a beat that I was super into when I first made it, but kind of just hit a wall with. I used it for a little snippet in a video that I made, and then kind of forgot about it. And then I moved, and then I got COVID. So there was like a lot of events that were between me and that passion that I had for that song that I started. But I was going through some of my project files and I remembered this piece and I thought to revisit it. It initially started on the digitact and the digatone, and I've since come to paces with the octatrack and thought, hey, why not try to add some octatrack flair to this piece? You know, there are a lot of cool performance methods that I could implement and some new samples that I had that I thought would kind of inspire a sort of shift in progression in the song. And it worked. And it super easily turned this piece that I was originally excited about into like 90% of a full song. And I have a video, which I will link up here, that you can go check out if you're interested in hearing that song and taking a look at the process of making that beat. And again, it's one of my favorite things I've done in a really long time, all because I just decided to revisit an old friend. Going through the motions. This is a fun one. It is totally mindless, zero pressure, zero commitment. It's a really fun exercise centered around the concept of making music just for the sake of making music. So the point of this is to go through the motions of making a song, but to be aware of your steps in the process and the structure of that creative session as it's happening. Sometimes it's easy to just fall into old habits when you're making a song, and it can kind of ruin the fun and make it feel rote and kind of disconnects that awareness from the process, which in some circumstances is a really great thing. But if you're feeling a little uninspired, it can help to become more aware of what you're doing. So there are a couple of options with this method. One is to basically write down every step that you take when you typically write a song and then follow that process. Just literally go through the motions and see what happens. Because when you break it down into sort of like a task list or goals, you'll get things done. Like it will just happen. And you might not like the result, but it's kind of a good way to just get the ball rolling again in terms of propelling yourself forward and putting that creative brain to work. A great and my preferred alternative to this method, though, is to do that, make your task list, and then take each point and then totally reshuffle the list or do the opposite of what you normally would at a certain step. So say your first item on your list is typically creating a drum loop. Maybe replace that with finding a melody. And then something like that will take the pressure off of having to decide on a BPM right away and can turn into more of a sound design session to find a cool lead sound, perhaps. Maybe you usually start with a chord progression. Make yourself start with a bass line instead. And that can kind of set in motion a groove that you wouldn't expect. And that groove can inform the feel of the drums. None of these processes are right or wrong in their own as they exist. But it can be really helpful if you do the same thing every time to switch it up and do the opposite. And being aware of your process and structure of song flow is a big part of that. And if it works out, you might have a new blueprint for yourself the next time you go to write something. And at the very worst, you end up with a crappy song and you gave your brain some creative space to breathe in a way that it doesn't normally. I tend to find that this method yields a lot of different results than the music that I would normally make. And it doesn't usually end up integrating into my body of work, but it's a fun exercise to kind of switch things up and remind yourself that you don't have to do things the same way every single time. This next method is truly one of my favorites, and it's actually not something I do really often, but it's just a ton of fun to kind of mess around with. And that fun is the important part, as I've mentioned before. It's really important to associate the process of starting a new musical project with fun, because it's easy to lose sight of why you're kind of doing this in the first place. But it's because you like doing this, right? It shouldn't feel like a chore. Anyways, this tip is essentially just to start a song as a joke. Maybe you found like a totally absurd sample that you end up chopping up and slicing rhythmically to integrate into a beat. Or one of my favorite approaches is to try to make the most superlative piece of music. Like try to make the most honky-tonk drum and bass tune you've ever heard. Somebody please do that, by the way. And the point is to just try to be creative in making something ridiculous. And the end result's probably going to be pretty cool and novel and like fun to show people. But also chances are you're going to like use your actual musical and creative skill at some point during the process. So like you're going to come up with a cool melody or a decent chord progression that you can remove from the context of that absurd thing you just made and use elsewhere. So it's a great way to generate ideas and take snippets of things that you're actually doing and put those in your rainy day jar of ideas that you can implement in other stuff. Again, the point here is to just get started on something musical and have fun with it. Another very no strings attached, no pressure method. Before the last tip, if you're enjoying this video, definitely consider giving the video a thumbs up and perhaps subscribing to the channel if you want to see similar content. I'm really enjoying kind of making a mixed bag of content with jams, tutorials, and just talking about synth culture in general. It's a lot of fun and allows me to explore different creative options in this context. But if you're enjoying this type of thing specifically, let me know because I'd love to make more of it. Also, I've got a Patreon if you're interested in browsing some different perks and stuff, or you want to sign up for lessons. There's more information in the description of this video, or if you go to patreon.com/slowhaste. Definitely go check that out. Okay. Back to the stuff you came for. So the last tip involves stepping away from your gear and trying to involve your mind elsewhere. And I've actually made another video about this topic on how to sort of get over writer's block. In that video, I focus on implementing creative methods that make you step away from your primary creative environment, but still engage your mind. I actually think I might be wearing the same shirt in that video. Yep, 100% am. So if you like the shirt, go check out that video. Anyways, sometimes you just really aren't in the mood to be working on something creative, and at that point, I think it's the best to just kind of step away and remove yourself from it. And that's okay. There are definitely times where it's best to just step aside and do something totally different. So yeah, if you're hoping to completely catch a break from your productive, structured creative mind, definitely give that video a look. I think you'll find it really useful. There are 5 tips to kind of break yourself away from that dreaded writer's block rut. We take a walk in the woods, we make some coffee, and just chat some more about creativity and ways to give your mind a break. So yeah, go check that one out for some more tips. I'll see you over there. Peace, y'all.